Morning. I wonder, when was the last time that God surprised you? Did something in, through, or for you, or for someone or something close to your heart that went way beyond anything that you might have asked or imagined? We've had a brilliant example in the life of our church just this last week of we've been hearing the amazing outcome to our recent gift day. Maybe we had faith that God might do something special, but I don't think many of us would have imagined that we'd be in the position where it would be possible to pay off all the outstanding loans that we took to build this centre in the next couple of months. Wow, wow, wow. The whole venture was audacious from the start, and it could only ever have been successful if God was in it. And time again, he's shown us that he has been. It's been an unfolding story of the faith of God's people and of God's faithfulness. Some of us have been part of that unfolding story for many years, some even for decades. But all of us who are here now are invited to be part of the continuing unfolding story of God at work in this community. Because it's never been just about building buildings. It's always been about building communities, about using these fabulous resources that God's given us to see his kingdom come in more of its fullness. And God has not finished with us yet. And, of course, the heart of the community project itself is also still ongoing. We still have the fourth part of the project, the refurbishment of our beautiful church building, to complete. But once all the necessary permissions have been given, we can move forward with confidence and faith to make our church fit for purpose for future generations, just as those who went before us bequeathed it to us. It's such an enormous privilege to get to play a part in God's unfolding story. I'm sure that many of us will have our own stories of when God's surprised us, done something that we weren't expecting. Because God's ability to surprise us is all part of the upside-down nature of the kingdom. So I said we're coming to the third in the sermon series where we're looking at the upside-down kingdom. A kingdom that's presented to us by Mathew, one of the 12 who shared life with Jesus during his 3 years of public ministry. Mathew, who had his own life turned upside down when he heard and responded to Jesus' call to follow me. Now, of course, that meant leaving behind his privileged, wealthy position as a tax collector in cahoots with the Roman authorities who occupied Israel at the time. Mathew can certainly speak from experience of the upside-down nature of the kingdom. A couple of weeks ago, David kicked off the sermon series looking back at Jesus' royal birth, not in a palace, but in the most humble, poor, unlikely circumstances. Then last week, Si introduced us to what it meant for us to live in the kingdom, when we took a look at the Beatitudes at the start of Jesus' teaching in the Sermon on the Mount. That's Matthew chapters 5 through to 7. And at the end of this teaching, Mathew leaves us with this reflection. When Jesus had finished saying these things, the crowds were amazed at his teaching, because he taught as one who had authority and not as their teachers of the law. He taught as one who had authority. Hold on to that thought. And so, on the back end of all that Jesus has been teaching, we pick up the story in Mathew chapter 8, where we're going to discover more of what it means to live under Jesus' authority. But before we get into the detail of today's Bible reading, the faith of the Centurion, it's worth noting that this is the middle of 3 healing stories that we find at the start of chapter 8. Jesus heals the man with leprosy, the centurion's servant, and Peter's mother-in-law. And we'll come back to the significance of this trio of stories a little later. But now let's pick up the story we're looking at today, here in verse 5. When Jesus had entered Capernaum, a centurion came to him asking for help. Lord, he said, my servant lies at home, paralyzed and suffering terribly. This centurion was a Roman soldier in charge of, you've got it, 100 men, the century. It was a rank of honor, so he would have been a capable man. But a man who found himself feeling completely helpless in the face of suffering. It is a horrible thing to watch someone we care deeply about suffer and to feel powerless to do anything to help. Desperate situations call for desperate measures. So the centurion does the one thing he can think of. He comes to Jesus and asks for help. Now, the thing about the stories that we read about in the Gospels is that whilst we get the bare facts, we do have to use our imaginations to really get into the story and to uncover more of the fullness of what might be going on. And someone who's doing that brilliantly and in a way that certainly resonates with my imagination is an American guy called Dallas Jenkins. He's written and directed a dramatization of the life of Jesus called The Chosen. Some of you will already know and love it. Others are yet to discover its delights. But I believe that seasons 1 to 3 are available on YouTube, Netflix, and Amazon Prime, so it's definitely out there. It is a dramatization, but it's brought to life with plenty of imagination, albeit with some reordering of some of the gospel stories to help with the storytelling. But on the whole, I have to say, I find the narrative and the way that the characters are developed very believable. And for me, the most important thing is that watching it has had the effect of making me fall more in love with Jesus. And that has to be good. I recommend it to you. But why am I telling you this, you might be wondering? Well, season 4 of The Chosen is just being released now for public viewing. And one of the scenes I caught a preview of this week is this very story that we're looking at today, the centurion's faith. In the dramatization of The Chosen, this centurion is actually someone that we've been getting to know in what's gone before. And he's got a name. His name is Gaius. We meet him first when he's Mathew's personal bodyguard in his tax collector days. There, he's got a really closed mind and a hard heart towards the Jewish people. And he's completely baffled when Mathew leaves all his riches behind to follow Jesus. But he sees for himself the transformation in Mathew. And he's intrigued by all that he sees Jesus doing, healing the sick, welcoming the outcasts. And as Jesus' ministry unfolds, Gaius' mind begins to open and his heart begins to soften, to the point that when he finds himself in this place of desperate need, he comes to Jesus and asks for help. Did it actually happen like this? Who knows? But we shouldn't underestimate what a shocking thing it was for a Roman official, a Gentile, to come to Jesus, a Jew, and ask for help. Jesus was touched by compassion that he saw as this man knelt before him, responded like this: "Shall I come and heal him? Shall I come and heal him?" Now, it's not so very long ago that we did a sermon series based on questions that Jesus asked, but I don't think we covered this particular question, shall I come and heal him? It is quite a question, isn't it? Which of us wouldn't welcome Jesus asking us that question if we were to find ourselves in a similar desperate situation? But here, the story takes a bit of a twist. Instead of leaping at the offer and saying, "Yes, please," listen again to how the centurion responds. Verse 8, "Lord, I do not deserve to have you come under my roof, but just say the word and my servant will be healed. For I myself am a man under authority with soldiers under me. I tell this one, go, and he goes, and that one, come, and he comes. I say to my servant, do this, and he does it." As a Gentile, the centurion knows that for a Jew to come into his house, it would make them ritually unclean, and he doesn't want to compromise Jesus in this way. He doesn't feel worthy. But over and above all of this, there's something even more extraordinary going on. This man, this Roman centurion, really seems to grasp who Jesus is. Did you notice how he called him Lord when he came and asked for help? But not only that, he also seems to get the authority of Jesus. He doesn't simply believe that Jesus can heal his servant. He also believes that Jesus doesn't actually have to be there. He can do it at a distance. Wow. Here's a man who really understands authority. As an army officer, he knows what it is to live under authority, and he knows what it is to exercise authority over others. And he has absolute confidence that Jesus possesses the God-given authority to heal, and that he doesn't need to be physically present to do it. He really is Lord of all. Now, Jesus was amazed by the centurion's response. He was blown away, so much so that he takes a moment to spell out the implications to his disciples. Verse 11. Truly I tell you, I have not found anyone in Israel with such great faith. I say to you that many will come from the east and west and take their places at the feast of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. But the subjects of the kingdom will be thrown outside into darkness, where there'll be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Remember that up to this point, Jesus has been ministering mainly to his own people, the Jews, God's chosen people, heirs of the promises of God. But woven throughout the pages of the Old Testament scriptures are prophecies that point to salvation being for the Gentiles too. Jesus knew that. But his followers there and then, they wouldn't have been expecting it. To them, Jesus' words about many coming from the east and the west to join them at that great feast in the kingdom of heaven would have been completely shocking. And still more the thought that there might be some of their own people excluded. Excluded not because Jesus didn't want them included, but excluded because despite his best efforts, he knew there'd be some who'd refuse to believe. Faith is the key to the kingdom. It was always so from the beginning. When Abraham received his call, we're told that he believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness. And it was just the same for the Roman centurion. It was his absolute belief in the authority of Jesus and his willingness to submit to that authority and call Jesus Lord that opened the way for Jesus to act. Verse 13. Then Jesus said to the centurion, "Go, let it be done just as you believed it would." And his servant was healed at that moment. It wasn't yet time for the gospel to be taken fully to the Gentiles, but Jesus knew that time was coming. And what happened with the centurion and his servants was like a kind of first fruits, a sign of what was to come. You may remember the great commission that Jesus gave his disciples before he returned to the Father, the very last words of Matthew's gospel. And Jesus came to them and said, "All authority," it's that word again, "all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And surely I am with you always to the very end of the age." Now, if we go back to that trio of stories that I mentioned that's at the start of Matthew 8, where Jesus heals the man with leprosy, the centurion's servant, and Peter's mother-in-law, we can see how Jesus is demonstrating this radical inclusivity of the gospel. It really is good news for all people. For the marginalized, those rejected by society, for the outsiders, those who feel they don't belong, maybe don't feel worthy, for those considered less than. For example, in Jesus' time, women. It's strange for us in our day and age to think like that about women because we live in such a different world, thankfully. But remember, it was only early last century that the women in the UK got the vote. Jesus came proclaiming the kingdom of God. We see something of that upside-down nature of the kingdom in his ministry, and we see more unfolding in the story of the early church. Let's pray we continue to see it lived out in the church that we're part of here and now, and maybe even be prepared for God to surprise us along the way. But as we draw to a close, I just want to pick up on that word that's been threaded through all we've been thinking about this morning: authority. What does it mean for us to begin to understand, grasp, and live out the authority that belongs to Jesus as Lord of heaven and earth? The authority with which he's commissioned us to speak and act in his name. At our staff meeting on Wednesday morning this week, Tom got us thinking about exactly this. Drawing on some teaching by an American pastor called John Eldridge, and based on a book he wrote about prayer called Moving Mountains, we were encouraged to recognize the reality of the world we live in. A world where there's actually no neutral ground, but a world where we get to play a part in pushing back the kingdom of darkness and in beckoning in the kingdom of light. And part of the key to making this happen is when we consciously choose to consecrate ourselves, to consecrate our bodies, our homes, our families, our sexuality, our ministries, our finances, our work, to consecrate these things to the Lord, willingly to place them under his authority. There's not really time to go into more detail now, but if you're interested in finding out more, I'd really love to encourage you to download this app. It's called Wild at Heart. John Eldridge has written a whole load of stuff, but this is an app. It's got a sort of strapline: love God, live free, and there are all sorts of helpful resources and prayers there. So if it's something that's just awakened you, provoked you to think, then I'd really encourage you to download that and to make use of the resources. And let's discover more about what it means to exercise the authority that Jesus has given us and to live well under his authority. The centurion made a decision to come to Jesus for help, and the same Jesus who healed his servant that day is present here with us today. He has the authority to heal, to save, to forgive, to provide. So will you come to him? And what would you like to ask him to do for you? What help do you need at the moment? Let's not hold back from asking, and to be prepared for Jesus to surprise us. That's what the business is, isn't it? The upside-down nature of the kingdom. So I'm going to invite Nathan and the band to come back up and to lead us back into a time of sung worship. And if you're able, I'd like to invite you to stand. You're welcome to sit, of course, if you prefer to, but let's, as we prepare to respond to what God's been saying, stand if we are able. Remember what we said. Jesus, the same Jesus that healed the centurion's servant that day, is here with us. He has the authority to heal, to save, to forgive, to provide. So will you come to him? And what would you like to ask him to do for you? Might be that we want to pick up on that thought of consecrating ourselves. Maybe a particular area of life that's difficult for you at the moment, maybe to do with your health, your physical health. Come and consecrate your body to the Lord. Willingly place it under his authority. Maybe it's what's going on in your mind. Jesus is in the business of transforming our minds from one degree to another. Why not come and just consecrate your mind to the Lord? Could be an area to do with your finances or a particular relationship that's difficult for you at the moment, or something going on in the workplace. Jesus says, come and consecrate it to me. Let me help you with this.